Welcome, I'm John Glanville, and this is video 46 in my Calmness in Mind series, where we explore common sense solutions for your calmer life. I've called this video DDD, which is Don't Do Drama, okay? And moving into a more right-brained outlook on life. Because it seems to me that most mental health issues, they're deeply ingrained in a left brain language-based modality of thinking, like worry and guilt, shame, blame, catastrophizing, doubt, control, paranoia, and fear. And these ways of living so often cause a person to unknowingly create a lot of drama for themselves and often for those around them. And what I mean by drama is anything that disrupts calmness, anything that increases interpersonal conflicts, and anything that raises emotional stress in either person. If person A says to person B, let's go to the beach, and person B says, yeah, that sounds fun, or no, you go without me because that's not really my thing, the interaction has calmness about it. There's no control and there's no conflict, and each person does what is appropriate or best for each of those two people. However, if person B were to say, oh, it'll be too busy there and there's never any parking spaces and you know how so loud it is there, so let's just stay at home. This may be the truth to person B, but it's still causing some drama to person A, who obviously wants to go to the beach. So one path does no drama and leaves person A to do as they wish, whilst the other guilts or manipulates them to behave in ways so person B's perceived discomfort of that moment is minimized. Now, I'm not stupid. I know this is a touchy subject. However, if we're going to find more calmness, then doing less drama and letting go of control and increasing self-responsibility will be a significant component of this transition. And it's my experience that most people are usually unaware that they're even doing drama. And very often to them it's just their normal behavior. See if I can give you an example. I recently picked up a client from the train station, and all through my drive she kept saying to me, oh, mind that cyclist, careful because the lights might change. Watch it, that kid could run into the road. And because I tried to avoid drama, I just ignored her. Okay, I remained silent and I just focused on my driving. I don't know if you remember back to video 29 where I said our ego feeds from our scary stories and feeds from our emotional fears, like a parasite trying to feed from us. And what we're really trying to do is to starve it of its fuel, which is our emotional discomfort. And then as I was driving along, suddenly a car dangerously reversed out in front of me, and I had to react rapidly to avoid a collision. And fortunately, I could avoid the collision because I was focusing on my driving and not distracted by all her emotional drama. So I responded to the situation, and then I calmly and silently let go of that moment, because although it was potentially dangerous, nothing had actually happened. There hadn't been a collision and we were safe. So I calmly and silently drove on without even commenting on what had happened. And then bless her, she just erupted into a whole rant about how dangerous that had been and how we could have been killed and why people like that shouldn't be allowed on the road. While silently I just drove on and focused on switching my triggered bodily fear response back from sympathetic to parasympathetic as quickly as I could through my silent mind and my relaxed state. And once we arrived at my house, Jen made this lady a cup of coffee, and she silently listened as she recounted the story of how we nearly died, and once again doing drama and unknowingly stressing her own body. Jen said to her, oh, well, at least you're both safe. And she too was avoiding joining in with this lady's drama. Now, later on, while I was working with the lady, I asked her if she was a driver. And she said, yeah, I've passed my driving test many years ago, but I'm now too anxious to drive. And I said to her, how does your husband respond to all your fearful thinking and all your comments as he chauffeurs you around? And he said, oh, he hates it, and we're always arguing when we're in the car. And I said, well, do you love him? He said, well, yeah, of course I do. I said, well, why would you do all that drama rather than just trusting him? Wouldn't that be more loving, you know? And wouldn't that allow him to focus on driving to keep you safe? And she thought for a few moments. And she said, why didn't you get upset when that guy nearly crashed into us? And I said, because he didn't crash into us. And I don't need to know what made him do that silly maneuver. And I don't want to waste my time judging him. And that my calmness was more important to me than anything else. And I said to her, listen, I'm happy for you to do drama around me. All I want you to know is that I'll hardly ever join you in it. And then she said something interesting. She said to me, because you didn't get angry, I thought you hadn't cared about my safety, that you hadn't taken that attack on my security seriously. And I said, well, actually quite the opposite. Firstly, it wasn't an attack on your safety. It was just an inattentive driver. And secondly, because I was 100% focused on my driving and not listening to your anxious drama, I was calm enough to be able to respond well enough to keep you safe, which I think is very caring. And I said, also by letting her do her drama and accepting her as she was, I also thought that this was a very caring thing to do. And then something must have clicked in her mind. And she said, oh my God, I do a lot of drama. Oh my God, that's just like my mother. And then later, as I drove her back to the station, I said to her, why don't you only look at the trees and the birds and the sky and the fields? Just look for anything beautiful and silently let me drive. Trust me to look out for danger while she was looking out for beauty. I think reluctantly, but she did it, she silently looked out of the window. Okay? And when she exited my car back at the train station, she looked at me and she said, it is much nicer without drama. And we both just smiled. I think worry stems from the process of thinking, which is mainly associated with the left side of the brain. Whereas if we were to copy what calmer people do, it tends to be more right-brained based. They tend to not do drama. They tend to accept things as they are, and they seemingly tend to look for the good in any moment, not the bad. So what I'm asking you to consider is DDD. Don't do drama, right? And consider where you might be doing drama, and then consider how you may resist or how you may stop doing it. Might you acknowledge that gossip and complaining and worrying about things that haven't happened yet, or moaning about things that have already gone, they are doing drama, and drama causes stress. And maybe when others around you are doing drama, can you silently detach? Maybe let them do their drama, but not be part of it. Don't try to reassure them. Don't try to find answers for them. I know this may seem a little condescending, but why can you say things like, I can see you're a little upset right now. I'm just going to pop out for a walk. I'll give you some space to process your thoughts. And you can make your own decisions, and I'll see you shortly. You don't have to be part of it. Now, another aspect of unknowingly doing drama is based upon how we might respond when old emotions arise within us, or from the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. I suppose one example is when someone causes you to feel angry or feel anxious, rather than trying to control their behavior or trying to avoid them, it might be helpful for us to resolving the emotional baggage within ourselves that is being triggered in the moment by that person's behaviors. Or if a person had a belief or a story that everything they did might fail, they're likely to experience difficulty trying new things. Therefore, this belief may invoke self-sabotage or avoidance behaviors of a dramatic nature, like panic attacks or arguing with those who are just trying to help you. So I believe that if we wish to find more calmness, one powerful technique is to explore how we might transition from a language-based left-brained approach to life and develop a more imaginative and creative, less logical, more non-verbal, right-brained mindset. If I think of the calmest and the happiest people I know, and the creative people I know, they DDD. They don't do drama. And I think it's why I like hanging out with them. And they seem to spend much of their day with their right brain engaged. You'll say to them, "What are you thinking about?" And they'll say, "Nothing, nothing. I was just looking at that cloud because it looks like a rabbit." Right? Or they'll say, "Oh, I was imagining what color to paint my kitchen." You know? Or they'll say, "Oh, I was thinking of my friend Sarah. I think I might give her a call and see if she wants to go out for a coffee." But if you ask a left brain person, an anxious person, a simple question like, "Shall we go to that barbecue on Sunday?" they'll often go into a lot of drama, like, "Well, who's going to be there? What's the weather forecast? What do you think I should wear? What food will they be cooking?" Whereas a right brain person might just say, "That sounds fun." It seems to me in a right brain person, their egos are not analyzing everything, which allows them to try new things and allows them to explore new perspectives without needing data or proof that that data is true, like the left brain person does. And the right brain person soon discovers experientially if a thing is true for them or not through their inner subjective experience of having taken that action. But seemingly anxious left brain thinkers are always looking for data before making any decisions. And then they look for proof to support that data, which often causes procrastination, or that individual might become stuck in loops of old familiar behaviors rather than just trying new things. Whereas the right brain sort of person is looking for feelings and emotions and experiences and connection with people and nature and life. And the right brain is just happy to try something to see what might happen. So what I'd like to do with you in this video is share one of my right brain adventures. An experience that I never would have undertaken 20 years ago, where back then my anxiety-ridden left brain needed proof and was really trying to control my life at every juncture. And what I learned changed me, and it changed my life in ways that my left brain logic and reason could never have anticipated. But before I share my story, I would like to make one observation. And that is, why is it, that despite all the advancements in medical, pharmaceutical, and psychological research, mental health problems seem to be on the increase, and full recovery is surprisingly uncommon? Might there be a missing aspect of recovery that is being overlooked? And it's my suggestion that it's because we require bodily wellness, we require mental wellness, but we also require a spiritual wellness too. And mainstream health mostly ignores the fact that we are energetic life forms, right, that are living in an intelligent, energetic environment called nature, and that we have a right brain need to be creative within that domain. So what I'd like you to do is keep an open mind as I share my experience, as I became more courageous and tried new things without my ego having to analyze everything, or my ego having to have proof that something was true before I was prepared to try it. So by popular request, I will share some details from Jen and my ayahuasca adventure from 2016, where we spent 3 weeks in Peru, 2 of which were spent living deep within the Amazon rainforest, participating in 8 ayahuasca ceremonies hosted by 5 Shipibo shaman. Now, for those of you who've never heard of ayahuasca, it's a naturally occurring compound used by indigenous cultures in South America to treat physical and mental illnesses and to allow them to connect more deeply with nature. It's legal to consume in Peru, whereas in other countries it's a classified substance. And isn't that funny in itself, how something is right in one place but wrong in another? Okay, and I think it's also interesting that things like man-made opioid painkillers or benzo sedatives, which are legal, though very, very addictive, are legal, and substances like mushrooms, which are just natural, can be banned. You know, I think it's a strange world we live in. Anyway, ayahuasca, in Peru they call it the medicine. Okay, and it's brewed from the leaves and the bark of two different plants. When boiled up, it makes a herbal tea, and this herbal tea includes a powerful hallucinogenic compound called DMT, which is dimethyltryptamine. And it's said that DMT occurs in small doses naturally in humans, and some people propose it's secreted during the traumatic birth and death processes, where spirit comes into the body and where spirit leaves the body. And they say it allows for our connection to nature or divinity, which is why DMT is often labeled as the God or the spirit molecule. Now, one thing I need to be very sure about here is I'm not recommending that you take any drugs. But I think it is worth noting that mainstream science and psychiatry are now investigating the potential benefits of using formerly legal but now prohibited drugs, such as MDMA, and mushrooms, ketamine, DMT, and LSD, because under the right condition, they seem to be very effective at helping a person manage anxiety, depression, and trauma, which is something that those operating outside of the mainstream medical establishment seemingly have known for decades. And also, many of the leading medical universities and research centers worldwide are currently running trials with these drugs, and many of them are finding very promising results. Certainly, if there's enough interest, I could share my thoughts and my experiences with many of these substances, whereby you can avoid them and stay safe, yet learn from my experimentations. So just let me know if these things interest you. But for now, this video, my focus is on my ayahuasca experience and the life-changing effect it had on me. So if I reflect back on my early life, and if I push my anxiety and my OCD that I experienced back then to one side, two other factors negatively affected my life back then. And the first was bouts of anger and rage, which dominated my childhood. And though as an adult, I sort of learned how to minimize them, they still occasionally affected me and those I love very adversely. The other was bouts of numbing depression that would suck the joy from my life, which started around the age of 13. And then, though from my mid-30s I learned how to minimize and manage them and cover them up, it was only after my ayahuasca experience at the age of 50 that the depression just left me completely. As best I remember, my anger started at a really young age, maybe 2 or 3 years old. And I have these vague memories across almost all of my childhood where I would often just explode with anger, and it would just erupt out of nowhere. And I would shout and scream, and I would throw things, and I would punch holes in the walls, and I would smash glasses, and I would slam doors, and I would storm off in a huff. Then as quickly as it had come on, it was gone. And whatever had in that moment been triggered within me and consumed me so violently was just suddenly gone. I'd moved from conscious control to an unconscious hijack, an overwhelm, then back to conscious dismay of what had happened. And then I had to deal with the guilt and embarrassment associated with the ridiculous unconscious behaviors that I'd expressed in that moment. And my poor parents would say, "Why did you do that? What's making you so angry? Why did you say those horrible words? And what's wrong with you?" But I could never give a reason, because there was no reason. It just happened. Something within me got triggered, and I was emotionally hijacked, and anger expressed itself. And because I didn't know why it happened, it was easy for me to blame others, like, "Well, you made me do it," or "It's because you won't let me do X, Y, Z." I think it was also easy to blame myself, right? It's because you're an idiot. It's because you're broken. It's because you're different, or you're just too stupid to understand life. Which, of course, those stories didn't do a lot for my self-esteem, but they did do a lot to further fuel my anxiety and my self-consciousness. Now, during my teenage years, the frequency of these anger outbursts were reduced, but they were always hovering around in the background. I suppose upon reflection, I can now see I had a very repressed, dominant warrior aspect of my personality. And I also had a hugely repressed nomad that I'd never really learned how to play. I had developed a false identity that had aligned with being a settler, a good boy who followed the rules and who tried to be nice to everybody. And I can so clearly now see that one aspect of my anger was the frustration of pretending to be good all the time, pretending to be nice all the time, whilst my warrior wanted to control everything, and my nomad just wanted to selfishly put myself first and do whatever I wanted to do. As I mentioned in video 12, I think most nice people have a lot of repressed anger because they did things that they didn't want to do, right, and had no outlets for all that frustration. And as we know, holding down all that pain and holding down that frustration very often fuels psychosomatic conditions like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, IBS, hypochondria, headaches, migraines, skin complaints, insomnia, back pain, sciatic pain, inflammation, stiffness, and conditions like that. My anger would mainly come up around those I loved. And I think that was because it was safer coming up amongst people I loved than around strangers who would never have tolerated such dreadful behavior. Now, growing up, I'm the oldest of two boys, and I always felt separated and detached from my family. I knew they loved me, and I had wonderful parents, but I didn't feel loved. Okay? I didn't feel lovable. Okay? And my younger brother, seemingly to me, had a much closer relationship with both parents. And this used to confuse me like crazy, because we'd both grown up in the same environment of my father working and my mother staying at home to raise us until my brother was old enough to start school. And I also had a very tempestuous relationship with my grandmother, my mother's mother, who seemingly to me back then was a very nomadic and carefree character with a very large drinking problem. And she would always drive my anxious and settler mother crazy because she was nomadically reckless and wouldn't let anybody control her. One of my earliest memories was from about being 4 years old, and my grandmother was babysitting us boys, and she was holding my little brother, who I guess at the time was about 18 months old, and then she turned from me and locked them both in the bathroom, where they subsequently sang songs and played games whilst I was locked outside, sitting in the hallway, feeling very sad and feeling very rejected. When my parents came home, I told them what happened, and they just sort of fobbed it off which of course made me feel even more rejected and even angrier. And then when I was 13, my grandmother was murdered. And to this day, I have absolutely no recollection, no memory of the months that followed that event. Okay, I was seemingly cold and detached. I hadn't liked her because she hadn't liked me, right? And therefore I'd grown up feeling that something was wrong with me that made her behave that way. Now I'm sharing all this with you because this story is relevant as we dig deeper into this story. And as I've said before, I didn't learn much of what I'm teaching here until my mid-30s, when I worked with my therapist and on myself to try and let go of my anger and to manage my depression. And I learned how to forgive other people, and I learned how to forgive myself, and I finally released my warrior and my playful nomad to be who they naturally were and always had been beneath all of my conditioning. I think I did quite a good job. However, every few months my anger would still boil up and spill out, especially around those I loved, which would scare them and myself. And as ever, I couldn't tell them why. And that confused them, and it continued to confuse me. And though I could minimize my depression and mostly hold it at bay, it still hovered around me, okay? Just looking for an excuse to re-engage. And once again, I couldn't say why, because I was doing everything in my life I could to live differently so I wouldn't have it. Therefore, with both my anger and my depression, there must have been more to it than just what my logical left brain understood. Hope this is making sense. So let's jump back to 2016. And that was the year that Jen's mother passed away. And she inherited a small sum of money. And I asked her one day, what are you likely to spend it on? And she said to me, I want to take you to Peru to partake in some ayahuasca ceremonies because it's time you learnt to deal with your anger issues. She said to me, I know you've become much better, and I know you've worked really hard on them, but there's obviously something deeper within you that needs addressing. Yeah? And though what you've done has got you this far, it will probably take something else to finish the job off. And she said to me, I've watched a few documentaries about people who have taken this nature's medicine, ayahuasca, and who have worked with some shamanic healers who can facilitate its operation. And very often between the two, it releases from the individual trapped traumas, hidden memories, and maybe even ancestral family issues or past life traumas. And she said to me, my mother loved going on a holiday, right? So it seemed just fitting that I should spend this money on the holiday of a lifetime, the adventure of a lifetime, trekking into the Amazon rainforest and trying something completely new. Now back then, I'd never really given that sort of thing too much thought. I had wanted to believe that nature had intelligence. I wanted to believe that God existed. I wanted to believe that reincarnation was true. But my left brain still needed more proof. Anyway, as I've been saying for many videos now, I decided to be skeptical, yet to still take action. So what we did is we booked the trip, and I decided that I would keep an open mind, and I would try to engage as best as I possibly could with the process, just to see what happens. I must be honest with you, just the concept of being in the rainforest, living in a little wooden shack with all the creatures that would be trying to eat me, that was scary enough before we even factored in the experience of taking a powerfully psychedelic substance. And it's funny how scary thinking about all the dangerous rainforest creatures when I was in the UK before I left, it was upsetting and scary. But once I was in that jungle environment, all the creatures and the bugs, they seemed very natural. It's kind of obvious, really, but sort of once you're in it, it dawns upon you that most of those creatures are just as scared of you as you are of them, okay? And that there is just so much beauty in the vibrant and alive life or death scenarios that are going on in that environment. I remember in the boat which took us down the Amazon River to our camp, which was like a long canoe with a thatched roof where we sat facing each other, 11 people on each side. And I was talking to the guy opposite me, a Norwegian psychologist. And he told me that he was attending the retreat because he realized that psychology could take us so far. And he was interested to see if nature could take us even further on our quest for emotional wellness. Anyway, as we chatted, a huge spider, bigger than my hand, fell from the roof of the canoe between our feet. And without even thinking, I just thrust my rucksack down from my lap onto this poor creature, and I held it down to ensure that it was dead. Now, I must just say that I don't like killing anything, but this was just an unconscious response that I had no ability to stop. It was just an unconscious, knee-jerk safety reaction. And only 3 people saw this happen. And we didn't want to make a fuss in case others might freak out and wobble the boat. So the psychologist just sort of put his fingers to his lips as if to say, let's not mention this. So as we journeyed down, I kept the pressure on my rucksack until we arrived 45 minutes later. And as we disembarked, the psychologist and I were going to flip the dead giant spider into the river so nobody would see it or have to step over it as they exited this little boat. However, as I lifted up my bag, the spider wasn't there. It hadn't been hurt and it had escaped. And for all we know, it could have been climbing up our backs. But here's my point. Sometimes it's better to not know. I think sometimes it's better to not think about things. I think sometimes it's better to stay out of all those left brain stories and just trust what is, okay? And accept that actually you will naturally respond to whatever presents itself one way or another, whether you analyze it or not. Interestingly, about 10 days into our trip, once we were more acclimatized to the jungle, we were having dinner one evening and a large tarantula spider fell from the roof onto the table as we were eating. And though momentarily it made us all jump, we were all then just intrigued at its beauty. And one of the guys slipped a piece of paper under it and took it outside. We can all adapt, and we do adapt if we allow ourselves to experience new things in new ways, which of course is the ERP that I've been banging on about through all the last videos. We can change. Anyway, back to my ayahuasca story. Put simply, the medicine puts you into a sort of trance-like state where the energy fields of nature work on your brain and on your body to release trauma that's held down within your body. And the psychedelic aspect of the compound reveals conclusions and memories, okay, that your unconscious mind has hidden from your conscious mind, or your ego has hidden from your conscious mind from you, or where your ego has changed the stories of things that may have happened to you so you may better handle those original traumatic experiences. And as these events are remembered by your conscious mind, or you might say released from your unconscious mind to be observed from your conscious mind, or as these stories are released and you went, oh my God, that's completely different to the story I consciously have, in those moments, what comes up from you is all that trapped trauma in the form of vomiting or screaming, as this trapped potential energy comes up out as kinetic energy, thus venting your atomic battery, making you feel lighter. You know this story, I've told it 100 times. Now this kind of made sense to me as a therapist, as I've been helping people do this for years, using techniques that don't involve drugs. But one of the biggest challenges was always, how can you find repressed trauma if it's hidden from the conscious mind? And this is why in video 15, part 2, I taught the meditation to keep searching for landmines by repeatedly going over and over past experiences and looking to see if we could find some trauma. And those who do that meditation repeatedly for months and months and months, they get great results. But it's my experience that usually people use it once or twice or 3 times and then they give up. Whereas ayahuasca seems to be the fast-track method to access and detonate all these hidden landmines all in one go. Now, because these trapped traumas release themselves in huge purges that often involve vomiting, on day 1 we had to visit the vomitarium, which I discussed in video 44 at the 30-minute timestamp. So I'm not going to repeat that story here, but please make sure you watch it, especially if you have any health anxiety, emetophobia, or contamination issues. Okay, let's get back to my story. Whilst under the influence of ayahuasca, the shaman work with you to invoke the spirit of nature to work through you by singing songs called ikarus, and then they subsequently facilitate the removal of trapped traumas or energetic entities from within you. Now, I must be honest and say that initially I thought the shaman were a bit gimmicky, and they were there to add some colour or some placebo to the event. But once again, I have to be honest and say, after having them work on me, my mind was completely changed. These guys are not like Bob down the pub who went on a shamanic training course. These people grew up in the jungle. They know every plant, and they are deeply connected with nature and the power of nature, and have been for many generations, to a degree that us in the West could never even get our minds around. Now, the retreat that I attended was called the Temple of the Way of Light. And Jen had chosen it mainly with her intuition, but also after watching a documentary of a guy called Bruce Parry. Okay? And he talked about his experiences there, and also the experiences of one of our favorite trauma and addiction psychologists, which is Dr. Gabor Mate. She also liked the fact that there were 5 shamans shared between 22 of us, and that there was a resident psychologist to look after our mental well-being, and a medical team there to look after us should we need any help. And the plan was for us to have 8 ceremonies over the course of 2 weeks, and in each ceremony you could increase the dosage to suit how deep you wanted to go, based on how courageous you felt about facing your inner emotional demons. The ceremonies themselves started about 8 o'clock in the evening in a big round wooden hut with a thatched roof, and had mosquito nets all the way around. So it felt like you were both inside and outside amongst the jungle at the same time, and certainly very, very close to nature. We all had a mattress to lie out, spread out in a circle around the whole room, with the shaman in the middle. And then one by one, we would go up to them. We would consider what we wanted to change in our lives. We would receive their blessing, and then we would drink the ayahuasca medicine, which I have to say is absolutely disgusting. Okay, but you drink it down, and then we return to our mattress. We lie down and we wait for the effects to come on. I had sampled mushrooms in the past, and I had played around with LSD in the past. So I was aware of how it feels when the logical left brain and the ego are turned off, which reveals the right brain's imaginative, creative, and non-verbal states, which I think are more aligned with who we truly are. I remember the first time I took LSD, I saw a monkey running around my room, okay? And although I could see how this might frighten a person, and they may call it a bad trip, that would only be until they woke up to the fact that their brains are incredible right-brained imagination tools. And they are so much more powerful than the left brain rigidly constricted perspective of logic and reason, and the part of them they are sort of more associated with. The right brain is very creative. It can come up with imagination of all sorts of things. So for me, that wasn't a bad trip. To me, I thought, wow, this is amazing. How cool is my brain that I can imagine this, and my brain can even make it visible, although I knew it wasn't true. And because I knew it wasn't true, it intrigued me rather than scaring me. Because I wasn't scared, I could even focus on my imaginary monkey, okay, and I could influence it to morph into other characters. To me, it was like being in a lucid dream, where your brain dreams, yet you can consciously interact with that dream. This is why I put so much effort into video 17, where I'm so keen to remind you that we don't look out of our eyes. Light goes into our eyes, and our brain adds with its imagination whatever image or whatever story you need to see. So if I go back to my story, after about 20 minutes, the compound started to kick in, and you begin to trance out, and your whole body begins to vibrate, okay? And you lie down, you have to lie down, okay? And your mind sort of trips off, or you might say dreams off, into another realm. And in that state, you totally separate from your body. You totally separate from the concept that you even have a body. It's like you're just an energy form. It's like you are the observer. And you can move through time and space, and you can experience what I might imagine it feels like to be your formless soul. And my first experience was so realistic that it shocked me to my core. Right? I didn't have a body, and I was just flying outside through the jungle. And it was daylight, even though we were in complete darkness. Okay, but instead of flying through air, the medium I was flowing through was like a body temperature, warm, clear jelly. So that if I stopped, I didn't sink down. I would just hover in that position, held by this invisible jelly. And all the plants and all the trees, they knew that I were there, and they were trying to interact with me in some way. It felt completely real. What I felt and what I saw was as real to me, with feelings and sensations, as any wide awake experience I've ever had. And then after a time of doing this, I reorientated back into my body. And so natural and so realistic was that, being the observer in that realm, that it was really surprising for me to rejoin my body. It's like, oh, I've got a body, I forgot about that. Okay, it's like I'd temporarily forgotten about that aspect of myself. Now, I don't know how long that little trip had been. It could have been 10 minutes, it could have been half an hour. And then for about 10 minutes or so, I was lucid again. And then slowly the trance came back on again, and I cycled back into another dream cycle. And this time, I found myself back in time. I was the young John of my past, 4 years old, and he's standing in front of me with my grandmother, who was holding my little brother, as I mentioned earlier on in that story. And I, little 4-year-old me, was having an angry rage, and I was throwing toys, metal cars, wooden building blocks, anything I could find at my grandmother and my brother. And my grandmother had turned around and locked themselves in the bathroom to protect themselves from angry little me who was trying to harm them. And in this moment, I knew that was the truth. And in the moment, I fully remembered it happening. My ego had modified the truth and hidden that truth from me. And I had been unknowingly consciously blaming her for something that I had done. And I still remember the shock of that realization, because in that moment I just sat bolt upright, and all that trauma that I had unknowingly been holding down, all that anger that had been held down for over 46 years, just erupted out of me in bouts of me vomiting into this big bucket that we all had next to us, ready exactly for that purpose. And as I started throwing up, the shaman came over and they sat with me and they started to sing all these icaros. And the more they sang, the more this energy would erupt up from me, from within me, and into the bucket. And this went on for about 30 minutes until I just collapsed back down, exhausted, and then cycled back into another trance where I re-experienced and remembered other times my anger had been expressed but forgotten. I remember trapping my mother behind a sofa by throwing toys at her in some outrageous fit of anger. Then, as before, as I had that memory, I would sit bolt upright and vomit out all of this energy. And sometimes it was vomit, and sometimes it's just energy sort of vomiting out of me. And this is the venting of the atomic battery that I keep referring to. Remembering the stories helps, but releasing the stuck energy is what's key. Strangely, though there were 22 people all going through a similar process in the darkness, it was hardly noticeable. You almost felt like you were on your own, okay? A, because it was all in dark. B, because all the shaman was singing and hiding a lot of the noise that was going on. And thirdly, because the depth of the trance that you went into and the results from it were so personal that you were just in your own little world. By about 4 a.m, the effects had worn off and you sort of come back to yourself, and then you could trudge back through the jungle to your wooden shack for some sleep. And though it was a bit scary wandering through the jungle by torchlight, it somehow felt that nature might be more working for me than against me, if only I could begin to trust it by dropping all my left brain need for answers and proof, and to just start trusting that nature or the godly verse is on my side. The next day, the whole group shared their experiences to the extent that they were comfortable in the presence of the shaman and a psychologist. And it was really amazing to hear that many people had very similar experiences. And I must be honest and say that the revelation that my grandmother wasn't being horrible to me, that I was being horrible to her, it shocked me to my core. Right? As I totally believed that first story, and that first story that she didn't like me had driven so many of my belief systems about me being unlovable and about me having something wrong with me. And of course, when I'd complained to my mother, she knew the reality, and she must have been amazed, okay, that I couldn't see what I was doing. Such is the power of our ego to hide things from us, or the power of our shadow self to hide from us that which everybody else can see. That following day, I was in a bit of a daze. I'd been blaming my family, but it was my fault. I thought they didn't love me, but they had loved me despite me being an angry brat. I had desired connection and intimacy, but was unconsciously pushing people away. And in that moment, I could see how many of my self-beliefs set up during my childhood were actually based on lies and mistruths. It also made sense where my need for perfection might have stemmed from. Because if I thought that they didn't love me, they could at least respect me, or at least be proud of my efforts. And once again, looking back at all this from this new perspective, was crazy, because obviously they had loved me, and obviously they were proud of me regardless of what I did. And though all this made sense, I still had no frame of reference as to why I was an angry child in the first place, because my brother seemingly wasn't angry, and we'd grown up in the same environment. Over the next 5 ceremonies, similar things would happen, okay? And I'd be taken back to forgotten experiences from school, from jobs, and from relationships. One surprising memory that triggered a huge release of trauma was from a relationship where I thought we had amicably ended that relationship, where in fact I had been well and truly rejected, well and truly dumped. And my ego had hidden all that pain with a cover story that we had agreed to separate. My ego had even made me consciously forget, that a few weeks after that separation, she had tried to take her own life and had called me to help her as she changed her mind. My ego, my little 8-year-old, my protective personality, had hidden all these traumatic events and the pain of these events by repressing all of that traumatic energy into my atomic battery, and altering my conscious recollections of those events. Yet beneath these fake stories, my ego knew the real truth and was still trying to protect me from embarrassment and hurt and rejection and loss. But it made no sense to my conscious mind, which was trying to make sense of these things but only had partial information. I hope this is understandable. In one of the ceremonies, the memory of another childhood trauma became consciously remembered. And in that moment, a sinus problem that I'd experienced since that event suddenly popped open, and I could just breathe naturally after sort of 40 years, okay? I suppose this aligns with the story of TMS, which I talked about in video 12, where the unconscious brain causes pain in the body to distract the mind from revisiting and rerunning bad memories. And that particular event had included a lot of lies and a lot of deceit from other people. And I think metaphorically, my body was sort of covering the stench of all that cover-up. Can you see how everything is connected somehow? And by just trying to use left brain logic and reason to find answers, it may be restrictive. I think it's wise to assume that the truth will set you free. However, finding the right version of the truth is often the missing link in most people's recovery. Okay then. After the first 6 ceremonies, I felt like the character Truman from the film The Truman Show, where he rose to the end of his environment from his little island, only to bump into the dome that was the periphery of his imagined experience. And he could no longer believe his old stories. And he had to decide how he would live his new life from that moment onwards, and what new values and what new beliefs and what new stories would he be telling himself about who he wished to become moving forward. So many of my stories that I had about myself were based on erroneous or error-prone information driven by my ego. And I was also shocked at how much trauma had been stuck within inside me. On the flip side, I felt lighter and I felt happier and I felt less afraid to let my emotions move freely through me and out of me. And it really, really dawned on me that I was so much more than the stories my ego was telling me of me or what had hidden from me. And at this point, I no longer had any unwarranted anger. I don't have any anger episodes at all, because all that held down anger released from me is not there anymore. Therefore, there's nothing to be triggered within me. Now, on the day of the penultimate ceremony, I had this deep feeling that something big was going to happen, which of course excited me, but it also terrified me at the same time, as I didn't know what else could possibly come up. But I decided to be brave, and I decided to take a larger dose than normal of the ayahuasca. And as I laid back, I decided that I would just surrender to whatever might happen. And as far as I can remember, because this one is a little bit of a blur, I kept finding myself in a tall building. And each time I cycled in and out of the trance, I would find myself one floor lower, then another floor lower. It was almost as if the building was a metaphor for my body or my life. And I was scanning down all the levels, looking for something within me that didn't want to be found, therefore was hiding from me. And at each level down, I felt I was getting closer and closer to something that didn't want me to find it. And by the time I got to the ground floor, my body was getting very agitated. And then in the underground car park beneath this building, an intense energy just flowed up from within me, and I began to vomit and vomit into my bucket. And it wasn't just vomit that was coming up, it was streams of energy just rushing out of my mouth, like big fat noodles of energy, and my body was making all these guttural sounds, and it just went on and on and on. And the shaman came over to me, and they were all laughing and smiling, saying, "Good, good, more, more." Okay? And each time I would throw up, and then I'd collapse back onto my mattress, and they would just pull me back up again and beckon me to sit back up again. And then they would sing these ikarus and blow smoke on my face, and they would sort of suck with their mouths on the energy above my head. And then it'd all start up again, and more would come up. And this went on for what felt like about an hour, maybe more. And each time I collapsed back with exhaustion, they would just pull me up again. And until one final push, almost like giving birth, okay, suddenly a rush of energy came flying out of me, and then poof, whatever was in me came out. And instantly in that moment, I felt completely different. And I said to them, "It's gone. It's left me." Right? And they were smiling and nodding and, "Yeah, gone, gone." And since that moment, I've had no depression. It's gone. There's no need to manage it because it's not there. Right? It was as if my depression was an energy inside me, feeding from me, okay, wanting me to be negative and down because it could feed from that negativity. But with it gone, there was nothing for me to fight against. Now, this is only my left brain speculation because I can't prove it. But it felt like after my grandmother was murdered, some part of her energy, some part of her darkness somehow got trapped within me. Now, my left brain has no way of proving that, but my right brain just says, kind of feels like what happened. And even if it's not what happened, it's a metaphor that seemingly closes the loop. With that gone, it also made my relationship with alcohol, which had been more than a little troublesome, but with that energy gone and the depression gone, my relationship with alcohol changed really drastically. I woke up the following day feeling like a new person, feeling so much lighter, feeling so much more optimistic, and whatever used to be niggling me from the inside was no longer there, and it was palpable in its absence. Now, as I entered the last ceremony, I had no idea of what might happen, but I felt sure there wasn't much more trauma to be released. So I was hoping for a little bit of a more positive experience, and that's exactly what I received. This time, like during my first experience, I found my observer or my soul floating through the jungle, and I could see and feel that everything was part of everything. If I saw a butterfly, I could experience being a butterfly. If I saw a snake, I became the snake. I really can't put this into words. It was very moving, very touching, and very, very deeply emotional. Everything was the absolute perfection of nature, and everything was perfect as it was within an environment of energy and intimate connection and perfection. It was the most overwhelming experience, lovely experience that I'd ever had in my life. I was completely integrated into nature. And as I lay there, I couldn't stop laughing and I couldn't stop crying. with the joy of knowing that I'm not separate. I'm part of nature, okay? I am nature. And all I felt in those moments were the deepest of love and connection. What then happened changed my life completely. My soul, my observer, or my awareness, whatever word you're comfortable using, it began to increase in size quite rapidly. Very quickly, it was bigger than the room we were in. Very quickly, it was bigger than the jungle. Very quickly, it was bigger than Peru. Then it was bigger than South America, then bigger than the Earth, bigger than the galaxy, bigger than the universe. And my awareness just kept expanding and expanding and expanding until I was the source of all creation. And in that moment, although this is so hard to put into words, everything made complete sense, although I have absolutely no way of putting this into words. It was as if I had connected with the God within me and the God outside of me. And packages of knowledge and data and energy were just downloaded into me. I remember the guy on the next mattress laughing at me because I kept saying things like, oh yeah, of course it works way. That makes complete sense now. You know, oh my God, that plan is so elegant, it's so wise. What else do I need to know? Teach me more. And for the next 5 hours, knowledge was downloaded into me, which at that time made complete sense and was completely life-changing. The next day, I felt amazing. And back in my normal conscious state, I remembered the experience, and my doubting left brain, which wanted to believe in God, but always needed more proof, said to me, okay, John, I don't have any doubts anymore. As to what was downloaded into me, I can't consciously remember. It's like it's all stored in my field as an awareness that guides my intuition. However, having experienced it coming into me, and at that time making sense, I certainly trust myself more. I trust the godly verse and nature much more. And when I'm in a deep state of silent flow, when I'm in a deep state of creativity, ideas and knowledge seem to appear to me on my mind screen from that unconsciously held source which resides beneath my left brain and behind all my logic and reason. Perhaps for some of you watching this, you might think that I've gone mad. Okay? Well, if this is madness, I really like it. My new calm, creating, trusting, right brain existence is such a more productive, loving, and far more pleasant experience than my old left brain search for knowledge and proof, which left me anxious, doubting, controlling, and fearful. Both Jen and I came back as different people from that trip. I would say better people, lighter people, and happier. We both now believe in the power of nature or God, something that neither of us truly believed or believed we ever would, although we had wished for. Now, there are many other stories I could tell about that adventure and Jen's experience, which was both different and similar. And perhaps we could make another video if people are interested. So my course tries to teach you ways to find these ego cover stories, these hidden realizations, and these trauma releases, okay? And to help you let go of self-limiting beliefs, to find more courage without having to take any of these substances. And one practical technique is to combine the results from the replicator model in video 29 with the results from your values and beliefs workbook from video 32 part 2, and to use those topics as the basis of a trauma release meditation from video 15 part 2. Let me see if I can give you an example. If from your replicator model, your goal was to be more courageous, and one of your new values was to speak with more truth, okay? When doing the trauma release of meditation video from video 15, You try to remember past times where you were too scared to be courageous, or times where you spoke the truth but were reprimanded, or times where you felt bad because you hadn't spoken your truth, or you had acquiesced to somebody else's truth that you didn't believe in. Then you try to allow the pain from those events to rise up within you, or you keep your focus on your torso if there is no emotion, and every now and again you'll see that the ego will release memories that may surprise you, that may bring up more trauma, that will certainly free you from the truth that's been hidden from within you. Another useful technique is my breathing meditation, detailed in video 43 towards the end. Once again, this is a powerful way to facilitate the release of trauma and stress from your body and from your energetic field. But I hope you can see from my experiences here, escaping anxiety and depression are not necessarily about clinging to your past stories, or clinging to your past beliefs, or clinging to your story about yourself. Nor are they trying to answer the questions of why things happen to you, nor searching for the proof of anything. Some things are just unprovable, but no less true, right, than that which can be proved. They're just of a different class, of a different domain, or of a different realm. Calmness comes from releasing trapped trauma, recharging your emotional battery, finding the courage to step into life, and by DDD, don't do drama. And purpose comes from finding an outlet for your creativity. Be that teaching, gardening, providing for a family, writing, painting, filming, singing, dancing, helping out in a community, or whatever might float your boat. And how will you know what that is until you go out and try? These are right brain activities that probably your left brain will try to talk you out of doing. But hopefully, if you're this far into the course, you'll be less identifying or even believing the ego thoughts of the brain. And finally, there's an interesting twist to the end of this story, which I think beautifully demonstrates why it's not important to ask why something happened to you. As I mentioned earlier, I never knew why I was an angry child, or where all that anger and fear and control may have come from, though I did manage to let it all go. Then about 3 years ago, in a random conversation with my mother, she told me about the guilt she had experienced when I was born. And she said that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mother, but financially that just wasn't possible. So in my early years of my life, until my brother was born, 2.5 years later, I was left with a neighbour, a childminder, because both my parents had to work full-time and both had a very long commute into London each day. And as she was telling me this story, she suddenly realised that this was the first time that I'd ever heard that story, because I had thought that she had been there full-time raising me as she had with my brother. Now, I'm not blaming my mum. I know how hard it is, okay? And it's just the way it is. I had a great mum. I do have a great mum. But if I'd have known that, it would have explained so much more about why I felt different in my family. It would have justified the underlying fear and underlying separation anxiety and the underlying anger and the underlying hypervigilance I had developed as a baby at being separated from her each morning and spending so much time with strangers. So I guess my point is, you'll probably never know the real reasons why you are the way you are, right? And I would say, stop looking. Just process out the pain, change your story, and start becoming who you wish to become now. So as ever, thank you all for your continued support. Please feel free to comment or ask questions. And I hope that this may have given you some interesting new perspectives. I'll put a few links in the notes below. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks very much.